Here is Stefania Cassini, and you're watching Without Your Hat.
Welcome to the station of decapitation without your head. I'm Nasty Neal.
I'm Treacherous, Trista.
And we're joined by Brandon Cronenberg, writer and director of Possessor. It's right up here. But it comes out on Blu-ray and DVD tomorrow, and it's out now in VOD. It's very cool to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
A really original movie. So I know, hey, I hate to ask like where the idea came from, but was there like a spark that like, hey, this would be a good idea? Maybe came with the ending first? Or?
No, I mean, yeah, it came from a pretty boring place, to be honest. It was the tour for ANTIVIRAL, which was my first feature. I was doing press for it. When you're traveling around with a film for the first time, it's a kind of weird experience because you're either deliberately or unconsciously building this public persona. You know, you're doing press and you're sort of performing this version of you, and people are treating you like this character, this like media double that then goes off and has its own weird life on the internet. So at first I wanted to make a film about the ways that we perform characters, or the ways that we build characters and narrative just to operate as people. And the sort of sci-fi horror elements grew out of that initial idea. But the seed was kind of in those dramatic scenes, actually, the relationship stuff and the family stuff.
It's interesting you said that, because in my notes I was watching the movie and I thought maybe I was way off, but I was like, it kind of reminded me of a social media person, where it's like you're one person on social media, but the real person is completely different. It's sort of what you're saying there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's definitely partly about that. And I think has become sort of weirdly more about social media since I started writing it, and since it's come out, just because there's so much discussion about the ways people are influenced by, foreign states, for instance, on social media, and the various kinds of incredibly subtle propaganda that can go on there, mass manipulation and such.
Was that something like you started to write into the script at the time, or that you kind of see now that the movie's out?
I mean, it started, the kind of political component, I guess, started with the Snowden leaks, because those happened while I was writing, and so I became interested in and the death of privacy through technology, kind of frustrated about that. The body possession stuff in the film can be seen as a kind of mind control parallel, but it's also a privacy thing. You know, instead of someone looking out through your webcam or activating your phone's microphone, they're actually in your body, seeing out through your eyes, or just as terrifying, they're in somebody close to you who's recording you as a kind of full body sensory surveillance device. But then, yeah, I mean, I think it's hard not to talk about the ways that people are influenced by other people and manipulated these days without getting into some sort of social media parallel, because it's just, it's on everyone's minds, and I think it's kind of a major thing that we're going to have to deal with in the next decade. Yeah.
That's what I like too about the science in the movie. It doesn't seem, very far-fetched. I think everyone could kind of like, this is, where things could go, and then not the so distant future.
Well, I did a fair bit of research into the neuroscience behind it, and it is rooted in some really, really interesting science. Actually, a lot of experiments that were done in the 50s and 60s with brain implantation. And I read a book by this doctor, Jose Delgado, who was involved in experiments, mainly in the US, although he was a Spanish doctor, where he was implanting patients with these brain implants, these things he called stimocevers, and so he could remotely control the stimoceiver to electrically stimulate parts of the brain through a wire that was implanted. And he could control this very alarming range of behavior and motor functions, but also emotional functions, and pretty fascinating, fairly terrifying stuff.
Yeah.
The thing is, for that technology to exist, though, I think it would be very far in the future, and I didn't want to. I wasn't trying to use the technology literally in the film. It was more to talk about us. So it's really set in a kind of alternate world where that technology can exist, but sort of in the present.
There's something I want to bring up too when you mentioned the technology. I like that you don't go too far into how everything works, because I think sometimes I can get shoehorned in like a sci-fi movie, and it kind of takes you out of it, because then you worry too much about like the how this would actually work in the real world. And this way you just accept it, what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's not meant to be predictive sci-fi. Basically, that technology is meant to sort of be a useful metaphor, or a useful way into talking about that other stuff. So
yeah,
it didn't make sense to get too into that. But there is a video there's a actual footage of an experiment that Jose Delgado did.
Oh, really?
In the film. That bull footage is actually historical footage, where he famously implanted a bull with a brain implant and then got into a bull ring, and it charged at him, and he could get it to veer off by hitting a transmitter.
Wow. If it didn't work, on, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, he was really trusted this demo scene.
Yeah.
Huge amount of confidence.
Trista, you have a question?
Yeah, similarly, I thought that antiviral actually seemed scarily like something that could actually happen. In fact, my roommate is a doctor, and I was texting her. I was about to watch this movie, and she was actually at the hospital, and she confused the text, and she thought that I was saying I was about to watch a movie, and then was telling her something that was actually happening in the news when I thought of the film. And she's an anesthesiologist. So I was stunned by that. And then I waited, and we actually watched it together. And while we watched the film, she was really blown away by how accurate your medical special effects were. And because I watch films with her all the time, horror movies, usually it's the opposite. Usually she's screaming at the movie because it's so ridiculous. So what I want to know is the medical research you did. And for that film, if you don't mind, obviously you're plugging Possessor, which I also love, but I'm a huge fan of your previous film. And I'm also curious if you used an actual iron lung.
So I did a fair bit of research. I mean, again, with some of the science in antiviral is, made up. The computers and the whole face thing is just sort of to give a face to the virus so that it will sort of be this deformed mirror vision of celebrities. And that stuff is kind of fudged to work metaphorically. But in terms of the virus stuff and in terms of, say, the cell growth, sure. I mean, it's interesting now because there are those cell stakes that are grown from celebrities. And in the film now, of course, we're on the verge of having actual grown steaks as grown animal meat as a product. But there was this art piece that was done recently I was reading about, where they grew human cells and turned them into steaks, and it was about the kind of ethics of cannibalism or auto-cannibalism, to discuss what it is to kind of grow meat and to consume potentially ourselves. There was a great hoax website that came out that was also about celebrity meat, like a year after the film, which only bugged me because I thought it would have been a great viral marketing campaign for the film at the time. Like, it was done so well. And I know. And there was talk of a viral marketing campaign, but it never really came together. And whoever did that completely nailed it. So, and I mean, some of the effects in antiviral were real. I mean, some of the needles were real, and so that wasn't really an effect. And I'm glad it was convincing, though, because you have also an advisor, like a medical advisor for those scenes, who's an actual doctor or nurse who's making sure everything looks real as you're doing it on set. But to a certain degree, you're kind of relying on them. But you can do some research, but I haven't obviously given someone an IV myself, so I'm counting on an advisor to make sure it's all passing.
Mm-hmm. How about the visuals for stuff like in the mind when she's possessing the other person? And I really like the melting scene and then kind of the reverse of that. And is that stuff you write in the script, or is that more stuff that you come up with after you film the movie? Like, how do I show this?
It's usually I write a vague paragraph that's just like, melting bodies, deformed imagery, nightmarish, whatever. Like, it's just very vague, and that stands as a kind of code for some of my close collaborators who will see that and be like, okay, we're going to spend a lot of time just messing with stuff and figuring out how to do it. And for instance, Kareem Hussein, my cinematographer, I work very closely with, and he lived down the street from me for a lot of development. I would go over to his house frequently, and we would just sit in his living room playing with cameras and lenses and projection feedback and gels and lighting, and just figure out how we could deform the image in an interesting way, and created a kind of storeroom of ideas on the camera effects side. And then Dan Martin, who's our effects artist, came on, and it was a sort of similar thing with him. Like, I had a few things that I wanted as I was writing, like the melting bodies. I knew I wanted to do some sort of melting and reforming effect, and so he did a bunch of tests for that. But Dan and Kareem are both sort of these mad geniuses in their respective fields, and so they come with a lot of ideas they want to try out, and we just, assemble a bunch of things that might work, and we play with them, and it's a process of experimentation.
Yeah, it might be more of a question for the actors, but do they see any of that before they see the finished film? No,
because all of those scenes are done practically. Like that's all of the hallucination scenes are 100% in camera. So they see some of what's going on before it's processed, but it's ridiculous. Like when you're actually there on set. I remember my producer came in, or one of my producers came in one day, and we were doing video feedback stuff. And he walked onto set, and it was just like me crouching under Chris and Andrea with flashlights, just like flashing them in the face while they yelled, and they were shaking their faces, and we were projecting onto them. And he just sort of like shook his head and walked like, to his credit, was not like, what the hell is going on? But he was just like, I don't know what's going on here. This is ridiculous. But when you're doing that stuff, layering projection feedback over it, and you're just trying to get those like few seconds here and there that work. And then when you cut them together, that adds another element to it. Matt Hannum is my editor, and a lot of those sequences, the visual language, he had a big part in developing. And then secretly, our last day of shooting was me and Kareem in his living room again, not able to turn the air conditioning on because it was affecting the electricity for the projector, and we were just like sitting there refilming scenes off his screen using lenses and flares and stuff to give it that kind of yellow effect, that distorted yellow effect for those sequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The movie's really violent, and while I was watching that, I thought it worked on a few different ways, like the violence, because it shows that like this isn't a joke. Death isn't like someone just falls over and they're dead. It's there's repercussions from this. And I also thought maybe there's something about when she's in someone else. It's I don't know if she like kind of enjoyed it in a way, because it seems like some of the deaths were a little over the top.
Certainly, I mean, so much of her character is about her relationship with violence, right? And and so I thought, first of all, you have to show it because the audience needs to feel in a visceral way kind of what she's feeling, or at least understand viscerally like what those scenes are and what it is to do those things. But then also the violence tracks with her character, and sometimes, for instance, it's more observational, sometimes it's more brutal and fast-paced, sometimes she's looking back at it and it's sort of almost fetishistic and sensual, and this is all her experience tracking with how it's depicted for the audience.
Yeah, which is all interesting, because I thought there was almost like a virtual reality for her in a way, because she got to live out things that she can't do in her own reality or with her own body, the sex, as a man, and the violence.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. That experience, she's something she's been drawn to, and but to a certain extent affected by. And
sure. Do you have another question, Trista?
I'd love to know what some of your favorite films are.
I'm terrible at answering that question. I always just
well, we are in the Doctors of December month, so if you wanted to specify doctor movies.
You know what? It's not a doctor movie, but The Nick. Did you guys watch The Nick?
Yeah.
really like the Nick for doctors. I thought that was great.
Yeah. That's on. Is that HBO or Showtime? One of those.
I think it's Showtime.
Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah. How about
maybe,
casting the movie?
Just what the process was. I don't know.
Yeah. I was gonna for Andre as the lead, because I think she's really perfect in the role. Was that hard to find?
I mean, I thought she was amazing. Like before I talked to her, I just saw her stuff, and I thought she's so incredibly good. I thought it was going to be hard to cast her because, I thought I'd have to really talk her into it. And I met her at TIFF in Toronto, and weirdly, she had already seen Antiviral, and she was friends with Caleb Landry Jones from Antiviral, so she knew about me and actually was already kind of interested in maybe doing something just by chance. So I thought it was going to be a really long, difficult sell, and then she just sort of kind of already wanted to do it, and then we're like, oh, okay, that's fantastic.
I really like her interaction with Jennifer Jason Leigh, and I also like that her character, like, so when Taj is like possessing someone, she's just like laying on a couch, like very comfortably, and I found that I like the contrast. She's out like doing real harm to herself and to people, and while the Gerder's just laying there on a couch, kind of nonchalant. Yeah.
Yeah, I was happy with how the couch turned out. It was a custom couch job. It was hard to get right, but I was really pleased with the upholstery ultimately.
How about Jennifer Jason Leigh, getting her involved in the movie? She's someone I think is amazing, and with that character, I mean, there was a potential risk of that character being boring if it was someone just playing it really straight and cold. That could be kind of an exposition character rather than someone really interesting. But Jennifer never does anything boring. Like, she's always amazing to watch, and so I knew casting her that she was going to bring some interesting stuff to it, and she did. I mean, all of that like great cream stuff and the mixing of the vitamins and the water, that was stuff that she wanted to be able to play with. That was all her, and it kind of brought the character together in this great way. Honestly, I didn't know it was her right away. It took me a little bit. I was like, I know who that is, and I was like, oh, I think that's Jennifer Jason Leigh, and that speaks to her as an actor. Because I try to go in the movie as cold as possible, so I try not to know who's in it and watch any of the trailers.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and Andrea also is that kind of actor where she's like transforms herself visually and sometimes is totally unrecognizable. So getting the two of them into a room together was really exciting.
And obviously, I won't give away the end, but the end's very rough. Was there ever any doubt, like, this is where you're going to go with the movie, and did anyone have any issues with that?
I may or may not have had to cut together a montage of those kinds of scenes in commercial film and television without giving away the ending. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I got a lot of support from it for it. I mean, it was a discussion. It wasn't. It didn't just pass completely unquestioned. But I mean, my producers were really supportive of me throughout the whole process, and the distributors also. I mean, Neon and Welgo, Elevation were all really great.
Mm-hmm. Do you have another question, Trista?
Previously, prior to making your own films, you've worked practically every position on set, from special effects to still photos. I'm just wondering if you had a favorite position.
I mean, certainly I prefer directing, and writing is also, when it's going well, it's great. It's the absolute worst when there's a gun to your head and it's not flowing properly. But I mean, a lot of that came just out of having been to film school, and so you try out all of the different roles on other people's films and kind of learn about them, which I think is useful. I think the more you know about everything.
I was going to ask that if that's helpful when you're directing or in charge of a movie, if you know a little bit of everyone's part. Yeah,
absolutely, because it's just the more you know, the more coherent your feedback can be. You know, if you have no idea what someone's job really is, you can be a complete idiot trying to explain to them what you want and not really understanding what it is they're doing. If you've done it yourself, or if you at least have some knowledge of it, you can get more specific.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Antiviral and having the festival run and kind of, you know, it's your first time making a feature film. And so then you have the second one. And I know you had some festivals, but then COVID happened. So a lot of the stuff you learned from the first one, you know, is kind of nullified here in your second film. So how has that affected everything?
I mean, it's very weird in a sense to release a film during a pandemic. I mean, the film itself, you know, it's played digital festivals and it's getting a release. I mean, it had actually a bit of a theatrical release in the US before everything shut down, but it's, you know, it's out now digitally and physically. But it's weird promoting it because you're not there traveling with the film. Like normally you would get to go and talk to audiences and it would be this whole thing where you really feel like it's out in the world and you're talking to people. And now I mean, I'm still doing a lot of press over Zoom, but it almost feels like playing a video game about releasing a film.
Kind of similar to the movie.
Yeah, no, it's very strange. You're just sort of sitting at home and then having these conversations. It's fine, but it doesn't totally feel like I've put a movie out.
Yeah. Is it, I mean, you still get feedback, like you said, through Zoom and stuff, but when you're doing the virtual festivals, how does the feedback work from the audience? Like, is it a chat or like, do they, you know, talk to you?
It's completely different for each festival. I mean, some festivals, there's no Q&A at all. They want like a pre-recorded intro video, but you don't actually talk to the audience. Some of them will have a moderated discussion where there's some audience questions from Twitter. And I've had a couple of Q&As that are sort of pre-recorded Q&As that they just play at the end. So that you're still there answering questions, kind of, but
right.
That's not the same. I mean, it's not the same as being able to, you know, talk to people after the screening. You know, it's usually nice to just chat with people.
Because I would think, you know, this movie in particular, Possessor, is like it would be interesting to see what people's take on it. Not even just if they like it or not, but what they think different things mean. Yeah,
completely. I mean, and because it's so open for interpretation in some ways, you know, I have my own ideas when I was making it fairly specifically about what the narrative is and what's going on with the characters. But I like films that leave some room for the audience to be creative and to disagree about what's happening. And I was trying to do that with this one. I find I've been able to talk to some people at Sundance, and it seems like they generally are on the same page as me, but sometimes people come up with these like really interesting, completely other takes that are not even remotely what I was intending, but are like totally fascinating.
Yeah. I would assume that could be fun too. Like, well, maybe he's right and I'm wrong about my own movie. I don't know.
Well, no, totally. Because once it's out there, I mean, it has its own life, right? And it's like, you're just someone with your own interpretation, but if it's not convincing, then you're kind of wrong, or, you know. Yeah.
I assume there's a lot of ideas. Like, I don't give much away the movie, but like the little salt or whatever it is, that's floating around. I'm sure there's a lot of people wondering what that is.
In reality, it's physically there though. It's like we use an acoustic levitator to actually hold a bit of. I mean, it's made out of styrofoam, but it's like sound waves pinning it in the air. I'll leave the in-movie version of what it is open for interpretation.
Yeah, I don't like to ask people what exactly. I agree with you. It's much more fun for people to talk about a movie afterwards, what they think about it.
Yeah, that's the dream. The dream is that two people will actually care enough about it to argue with each other. You know.
Yeah. Trista, another question?
Yeah, I mean, we're both huge fans of your work. So is there anything you can tell us about any upcoming projects?
Yeah, I have two films that are pretty close to coming to shooting. A little pandemic dependent, so we'll see when I actually get to make them. But there's a film called Infinity Pool, which is like a tourist resort satire with some sci-fi horror elements, and a trippy space horror movie called Dragon. They're both written and like pretty close, and so I hope I'm going to get to make them more or less back to back.
So real quick about genre, because something comes up in the show, and sometimes I have arguments online. Because for me, it doesn't really matter what genre a movie is, as long as you like it. But do you run into that problem at all? Because your movies don't necessarily fit into one genre, or they fit into multiple genres, which to some people will nullify them from one genre.
Well, you know what? It's funny. It's weirder and more tricky in terms of marketing than anything else. Like, I find when it comes to distribution and when it comes to marketing, people really want to decide what genre your thing fits into, because then, you know, you literally will have a label, you know, is it horror or is it sci-fi, for instance, on iTunes? Like, how is it categorized? And depending on what genre it is or how they want to position it, the various posters that they'll mock together will be completely different, because, you know, there are companies that just mock up posters and that's their entire thing, and they have, you know, the horror version and the drama version and the sci-fi version. So it gets messy from that perspective, but I agree with you, you know, in terms of actual, like, I don't think you can really categorize it. Like, how do you define horror? Like, I don't, when you really get into it and you look at the total history of horror films and everything that has ever been considered horror, like, how do you really categorize that? You know, you kind of, there are things you can talk about, but it's not really that simple.
Horror specifically, because there's so many like different types of horror movies. There's, you know, just total blood and guts, and something that has no gore at all, and, you know, comedy, and
yeah, it's really tricky, and it's funny because I think people who aren't really into horror, who aren't like horror fans, have this conception of horror as, you know, the Conjuring universe, or it's like it's horror if there are jump scares, or you know, there's a kind of mainstream idea of what horror is, and that is horror, like, it's part of it, but it's such a different world when you're talking to people who like horror generally and like the history of the genre. Then, you know, it's much harder to define, I think, when you take all that into account.
Do you have much input on the actual, like the cover art?
To a certain degree. I mean, I think distributors will often sort of humor you, and they don't want to do something that you hate. You know, hopefully, if the, you know, Neon were great to work with and Welgo when it came to the art, so I was involved in the discussion. But it's also ultimately their thing that they're putting out, and so I can give them feedback, but it's their call in the end.
I think the yellow stands out. It's something different than orange and blue.
I like what they did with it. I thought the yellow was a good call.
I agree. Any last questions, Trista?
I guess, would you have any advice for aspiring filmmakers?
It's so hard to give advice to people who want to make films, because there's no right way to do it. You know, especially if you're talking about directing. It isn't like, say, cinematography, where you can start in the camera department and learn, and, you know, or being an AD. If you want to be an AD, you start as a trainee and you work your way up. With directing, you kind of just have to find a way to do it, to demonstrate that you can do it, and there's no right way to do that. So, I mean, I think what I would say is short films, obviously a great place to start, just because they don't cost so much money and they're a kind of contained piece. I would say it's very good to do something that you can make with whatever resources you have available to you completely. You know, if you can only have one shot that doesn't move in a room with one actor, like, you can write an interesting film that way. It's better than trying to do a really terrible space opera when you don't have the money to do a space opera. And I mean, the other thing I'd say is clever ideas are something lacking in the film industry. I know some people who try and like put a bunch of money into their shorts, and you're never really going to impress producers because you put some money into your shorts. But if you have a clever idea, that's something that everybody needs. You know, there are not enough ideas in the film industry. So, you know, you can do something simple but smart, and that'll get people more excited about you.
That's interesting, because I always thought like with the shorts really almost like your calling card, like this is what I can do, you know, with a budget. So like you say, don't necessarily put all your budget in the short. Yeah, no, I would say the thing is, like I have some friends who've done trailers that have gone sort of viral, and they put a lot of money into trailers, well, relatively, you know, for indie short. But the thing is, you would think, okay, that's a great idea because you're implying what the massive feature sci-fi epic could be. But in reality, when you're trying to get a film made after that, you haven't done scenes, like you haven't demonstrated that you can just do a scene and tell a story from start to finish. I feel like you're better off doing like a contained, polished thing with an idea that can then play festivals and is a complete story, and it has a, you know, start to finish scenes in it. And I don't know, that seems more useful from what I've seen. Yeah. Unless you're a VFX wizard and you're just like blowing everyone away with you know, there are people who go that route also, so there's no right way to do it. But yeah, and the festival scene's a great way to meet other people and get good connections, I think. For sure. And then you have a little bit, you know, you win a couple of awards maybe, or you know, you have some actual festival play credits to your name, and I don't know, I think it's a good way to step up into it. Yeah. So Possessor is out on video on demand, and it'll be out on Blu-ray and DVD probably when this show is up on Tuesday. Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's really great to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Yep. Bye. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye.
This is Nick Castle, and you're watching Without Your Head. Keep your head on. Bye-bye.